You live in the noisiest era in human history, not just loud in sound, but loud in intention, loud opinions, loud goals, loud reactions. Every thought is posted, every plan is announced, every emotion is displayed in real time. And yet, despite all this noise, very little real power is being built. Here is the uncomfortable truth most people never slow down enough to face. Being busy is not the same as being effective, and being visible is not the same as being formidable. Modern life rewards motion, not direction, activity, not mastery. You are encouraged to respond instantly, speak constantly, and prove yourself publicly. But power does not grow in exposure. Power grows in compression. It grows when energy is contained, refined, and directed instead of scattered. The people who truly change their lives are rarely the loudest ones in the room. They are usually the quietest, working on things no one can see yet. Silence, as we will use the word here, does not mean withdrawal or passivity. It does not mean isolation or weakness. Silence is restraint. Silence is control. Silence is the decision to act without the need for immediate recognition. Psychologically, this matters more than most people realize. Research on self-regulation shows that when actions are driven by external validation, motivation becomes fragile. You perform for approval, not for results. The moment the applause disappears, so does your consistency. Consider the mechanism at work. When you announce a goal publicly, your brain often experiences a dopamine reward before the work is done. Neuroscientists' studies on reward prediction show that anticipation alone can trigger satisfaction. This is called premature reward closure. Your nervous system partially checks the box before you've earned the outcome. The result is subtle but dangerous. Urgency drops, discipline softens, and execution slows. Silence prevents that leak. It keeps the reward tied to completion, not conversation. This is why so many people feel exhausted without being effective. They are constantly reacting. Notifications decide their schedule. Opinions decide their emotions. Trends decide their priorities. Reaction feels like movement, but it is not progress. Power begins the moment reaction ends. The moment you stop needing to respond to everything, you regain cognitive bandwidth. Attention, after all, is not just focus. It is the raw material of self-mastery. Think of attention as a finite resource, similar to capital. Every unnecessary reaction is a withdrawal. Every emotional impulse indulged without reflection is an expense. Most people run a deficit without realizing it. Silence functions like budgeting. It reduces waste. It creates surplus. That surplus becomes clarity, and clarity is the precondition for control. There is also a social illusion at play. We are taught that confidence must be performed, but performed confidence is brittle. It requires constant reinforcement. True confidence is internal reference. It is built through evidence accumulated privately, small promises kept, hard tasks completed without witnesses. This type of confidence does not need to be announced because it does not depend on agreement. It depends on memory. Your nervous system remembers what you have survived and executed before. The silent few understand something most never learn. Identity is shaped more by what you do repeatedly than by what you say once. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself, you strengthen self-trust. Every time you delay gratification without external pressure, you reinforce agency. These are not dramatic moments. They are quiet repetitions. And repetition, not intensity, is what rewires behavior. This audiobook is not designed to entertain you with hype. It is designed to train you. Training requires friction. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to be misunderstood in the short term so you can be undeniable in the long term. We will not chase inspiration here. Inspiration is unstable. We will build systems, mental, emotional, and behavioral, that function regardless of mood. You may notice resistance as you listen, a pull to check something, an urge to share an insight immediately. That impulse itself is diagnostic. It reveals how deeply conditioned the mind has become to externalize instead of integrate. Mastery begins when insight is applied before it is shared, when understanding changes behavior before it becomes language. Silence also creates a strategic advantage. When others underestimate you, they reveal themselves. They show their habits, their impatience, their lack of depth. You gain information while conserving energy. In decision science, this is asymmetric positioning. One side expends resources signaling, the other accumulates leverage preparing. Over time, leverage compounds. This is the foundation of everything that follows. Before focus, before discipline, before influence, there must be containment. A mind that does not leak intention, an emotional system that does not broadcast instability, an identity that does not require constant affirmation. Silence is not the end goal. It is the training ground. As you move forward, you are not being asked to disappear. You are being asked to become precise, to choose when to speak and when to work, when to reveal and when to refine. The world rewards noise quickly and power slowly. This is an invitation to play the slower game. What comes next builds on this foundation: control of thought, regulation of emotion, precision of action, presence without performance. None of it works without silence first, because before you can master anything else, you must master the space inside you where decisions are made. Chapter 1. Why silence is your greatest weapon. Most people think announcing their goals makes them real. It feels productive, it feels brave, but that feeling is exactly the problem. The moment you speak a goal out loud, your brain often mistakes intention for execution. You feel progress without making any. That single misunderstanding quietly destroys more potential than failure ever could. When you announce a goal, your nervous system receives social reward before the work begins. Neuroscience research on dopamine prediction shows that the brain responds not just to achievement, but to anticipated approval. Likes, encouragement, and validation create a chemical signal similar to completion. This is called premature satisfaction. The mind relaxes its grip because biologically, it believes progress has already been made. Urgency fades, discipline weakens, effort becomes optional. This is why so many people start strong and finish nowhere. They talk themselves into comfort. The loud dreamer seeks witnesses. The silent achiever seeks evidence. One collects reactions, the other collects results. Over time, only one compounds. Silence protects focus by removing an invisible tax. Every time you explain your plan, you invite interpretation, doubt, and comparison. Even supportive feedback fragments attention. Your mind begins adjusting the goal to fit approval instead of truth. Psychologists call this external reference orientation, measuring yourself by response rather than standards. Execution suffers because the target keeps shifting. Modern platforms amplify this weakness. Social media is optimized for expression, not follow-through. It rewards clarity of speech, not consistency of action. Algorithms favor bold declarations and emotional signals because they generate engagement quickly. But engagement is not progress. It is distraction dressed as momentum. You become busy maintaining an image instead of building capability. Silence reverses this dynamic. When no one is watching, behavior becomes honest. You either show up or you don't. There is no performance buffer. This creates clean feedback. Clean feedback accelerates learning. Skill acquisition research consistently shows that private, focused practice produces faster improvement than public, performative effort. Mastery thrives away from the spotlight. There's also a deeper psychological advantage. Silence strengthens identity through self-trust. Every unannounced action completed becomes proof stored internally. Your confidence stops relying on reassurance and starts relying on memory. This is known as internal evidence accumulation. It stabilizes motivation because it is anchored in experience, not opinion. Contrast this with the loud cycle. Announce goal, receive validation, miss execution, feel shame. Announce new goal to reset identity, repeat. This loop feels active but produces stagnation. Silence breaks the loop by removing the emotional shortcut. You earn satisfaction only through completion. Silence also preserves emotional energy. Talking about plans triggers micro-commitments. When progress stalls, cognitive dissonance appears. You feel pressure to justify instead of improve. Energy shifts from execution to explanation. Over time, this erodes resilience. Silent work avoids this drain entirely. Think of power like pressure in a sealed system. Containment increases force. Leakage weakens it. Silence contains intention. It allows pressure to build until action becomes inevitable. This is why quiet consistency outperforms loud ambition. The force is directional, not dispersed. None of this means secrecy for its own sake. Silence is strategic restraint. You speak when speech serves execution, not ego. You share results, not intentions. You let outcomes introduce you. This requires patience. It also requires humility. But humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking less about being seen. As you move forward, practice this shift deliberately. When you feel the urge to announce, pause. Ask a precise question. Does speaking this help me execute or help me feel recognized? If it's the second, stay silent. Redirect that energy into the next small action. Build proof instead of promise. Power grows in privacy, not because the world is hostile, but because mastery is fragile in its early stages. Protect it. Let silence do its work. Stop broadcasting the future. Start building it. Chapter 2. The Self-Mastery Pyramid. Most people believe discipline is a single trait. You either have it or you don't. That belief is convenient, and it is wrong. Discipline is not a switch. It is a structure. And without structure, effort collapses under its own weight. This is why so many driven people feel stuck despite working hard. They are applying force horizontally instead of building upward. Self-mastery is hierarchical. Each level supports the next. Skip a level, and everything above it becomes unstable. The pyramid has 4 tiers: physical mastery, emotional mastery, mental mastery, and spiritual mastery. Most people touch the first level and mistake contact for completion. Physical mastery is where nearly everyone begins. Control of the body, sleep, nutrition, movement, training. This level is visible, measurable, and socially reinforced. You can post it, you can track it, you can prove it quickly. That is why it feels productive. Physical discipline teaches one essential skill: delayed gratification. You train when you don't feel like it. You recover when rest feels undeserved. This is foundational. but it is not sufficient. The trap is stopping here. Gym discipline without emotional regulation turns intensity into volatility. You become strong but reactive, fit but fragile. A single insult, setback, or inconvenience can derail weeks of effort. This is why physical mastery alone often produces inconsistent results. The body obeys structure. The emotions obey perception. Emotional mastery is the second tier. It is the ability to experience emotion without being controlled by it. Not suppression. Regulation. Neuroscience shows that emotions are rapid physiological signals designed to guide behavior, not command it. When unmanaged, they hijack decision-making through the amygdala, narrowing perspective and accelerating impulse. Emotional mastery restores choice. This level teaches you to pause between stimulus and response, to notice activation without immediately acting on it, to label feelings precisely instead of vaguely. Precision reduces intensity. This is called affect labeling, and research shows it lowers limbic activation while increasing prefrontal control. Without this skill, physical discipline collapses under emotional stress. Above emotion sits mental mastery. This is where most people struggle without realizing it. Mental mastery is not positive thinking. It is thought selection, the ability to notice, challenge, and redirect internal narratives. Thoughts are not neutral. They consume cognitive resources. Rumination drains energy. Catastrophizing distorts risk. Mental mastery reclaims bandwidth. Cognitive psychology demonstrates that untrained thinking increases decision fatigue. Every unresolved internal debate taxes executive function. Over time, willpower erodes. Mental mastery reduces this load by installing rules, frameworks, and defaults. Fewer decisions, clear priorities, less noise, more execution. The final tier is spiritual mastery. This is not belief or doctrine, it is alignment, knowing why you act when no one is watching. Purpose stabilizes behavior under pressure. Studies on meaning-making show that individuals with clear value alignment persist longer through discomfort and recover faster from failure. Without this level, success feels hollow and discipline eventually decays. Here is the pattern that keeps people stuck. They build strength without stability, effort without order, activity without alignment. They stay busy moving across tasks instead of building upward through levels. Horizontal busyness feels productive, but produces diminishing returns. Vertical growth feels slower, but compounds. The pyramid explains why motivation fades. Each level relies on the one beneath it. Emotional instability undermines physical consistency. Mental chaos weakens emotional regulation. Lack of purpose erodes mental clarity. When the structure is incomplete, effort leaks. Self-mastery is not about doing more. It is about stacking control, body, emotions, thoughts, purpose, in that order. You do not skip levels by force. You earn progression through integration. As you continue, you are not being asked to abandon effort. You are being asked to organize it. Build the structure first, because without internal architecture, external success becomes another form of instability. Chapter 3: Building Your Internal Fortress. Most people think confidence comes from success. In reality, confidence comes from predictability, knowing how you will behave when conditions are uncomfortable. The problem is that most self-belief today is outsourced. It depends on feedback, reassurance, visibility, and reaction. When those disappear, so does certainty. An internal fortress is built for the opposite condition. It is designed to hold when no one is watching and nothing is affirming you. An internal fortress is a psychological structure made of internal reference points. An internal reference point is any standard, metric, or rule you use to evaluate yourself without external input. When these are absent, the mind defaults to social comparison. Research in social psychology shows that humans instinctively measure worth relative to others when internal standards are weak. This creates volatility. Your confidence rises and falls based on things you do not control. External validation is unstable by design. It fluctuates with trends, opinions, and visibility. Internal validation is slower to build, but exponentially more durable. It is based on memory, not reaction. Every time you keep a promise to yourself that no one knows about, you add a brick. Over time, those bricks form containment. Containment is what allows pressure without collapse. The mechanism here is simple but underappreciated. The brain tracks identity through evidence, not affirmations, not intentions. Evidence. When you repeatedly act according to a standard you set privately, the nervous system updates its self-model. This is called self-perception theory. You become what you observe yourself doing consistently. Silence accelerates this process because it removes performative distortion. To build the fortress, you need daily rituals that are small, repeatable, and non-negotiable. Rituals differ from habits in one key way. Rituals are identity-bound. A habit is something you do. A ritual is something that defines who you are. The purpose is not productivity. The purpose is reliability. Start with a morning anchor. One action completed before the world makes a demand. It should take between 5 and 15 minutes. Examples include focused breathing, writing a single page, mobility work, or silent planning. The content matters less than the constraint. It must be done regardless of mood. This trains behavioral sovereignty, the ability to act without emotional permission. Next is the midday reset. Most people leak energy reactively throughout the day. A reset interrupts this. It can be a 5-minute walk, controlled breathing, or deliberate disengagement from stimulation. Physiologically, this downregulates cortisol and restores attentional capacity. Psychologically, it reinforces agency. You are choosing when to re-enter, not being pulled back in. The third ritual is the evening review. This is where internal reference points are strengthened explicitly. The review has 3 questions only. What did I execute despite resistance? What did I avoid, and why? What will I adjust tomorrow? Keep it factual. No moral judgment. Research on deliberate practice shows that improvement accelerates when feedback is specific and emotionally neutral. This is where learning compounds. Over time, these rituals produce something subtle but powerful: emotional insulation. Opinions bounce off instead of penetrating. Praise no longer inflates. Criticism no longer destabilizes. This does not make you indifferent. It makes you selective. You choose which input deserves influence. A common mistake is overbuilding. People try to add 10 rituals at once. This creates fragility. Fortresses are built brick by brick. One ritual installed permanently is more valuable than 5 practiced temporarily. Stability beats intensity. Another mistake is visibility. Posting rituals turns them into performance. Performance shifts focus from execution to perception. Keep your rituals private. Privacy preserves integrity. Integrity reinforces self-trust. As the fortress strengthens, you will notice a change in decision-making. Fewer internal debates. Less need to explain yourself. More follow-through. This is not confidence as emotion. It is confidence as structure. From here, the work becomes more precise. Once the fortress exists, you can begin actively managing what enters it. Thoughts, narratives, assumptions. The next step is not building walls, it is controlling the traffic through the gate. Chapter 4. The Thought Management System. Your mind is producing thousands of thoughts every day, whether you invite them or not. Most of them arrive unannounced, unquestioned, and unexamined. You experience them as facts, even when they are guesses. You obey them as commands, even when they are habits. This is the hidden sabotage of unmanaged thinking. It feels like reality, but it is often just repetition. The uncomfortable truth is this: your life is not shaped by your best thoughts, but by the ones you never interrupt. Unmanaged thinking operates on automation. Cognitive science refers to this as default mode processing. When the brain is not directed, it falls back on familiar neural pathways. These pathways were built through repetition, emotional charge, and past survival needs. They are efficient, not accurate. That efficiency is useful for routine tasks, but dangerous for decision-making. Left unchecked, the mind optimizes for familiarity over truth. This is why negative thought loops are so persistent. A loop forms when a thought triggers an emotion. The emotion reinforces the thought, and the cycle repeats without conscious review. I'm falling behind produces anxiety. Anxiety narrows perception. Narrowed perception finds evidence of falling behind. The loop feels logical because it is internally consistent, but consistency is not correctness. Without interruption, these loops become identity narratives. Thought management begins with a critical distinction. Thoughts are events, not instructions. Neuroscientifically, a thought is a pattern of electrical and chemical activity. It is not a verdict. The brain generates thoughts the same way the stomach produces acid, automatically, for functional reasons. The error most people make is treating every thought as intentional and meaningful. This creates unnecessary obedience. The first skill is recognition. You cannot manage what you do not notice. Recognition means developing meta-awareness, the ability to observe thinking while it is happening. This engages the prefrontal cortex, which can modulate activity in emotional and habitual regions of the brain. Research on metacognition shows that even brief awareness reduces the intensity and credibility of intrusive thoughts. Once a thought is noticed, interruption becomes possible. Interruption is not suppression. Suppression increases rebound. Interruption is a deliberate pause that breaks momentum. One effective method is temporal labeling. You silently say, "This is a thought about the future," or "This is a memory loop." Labeling creates distance. Distance restores choice. After interruption comes evaluation. This is where most people either argue emotionally or give up. Effective evaluation uses criteria, not mood. Ask 3 questions only. Is this thought factual or interpretive? Is it useful for action right now? Is it aligned with the person I am training myself to become? A thought can be true and still unhelpful. It can feel urgent and still be irrelevant. Replacement is the next step, and this is where discipline enters. Replacement does not mean positive thinking. It means intentional thinking. You select a thought that serves execution better than the original. For example, replace "I don't feel ready" with "readiness follows repetition." The replacement must be believable and actionable. Unrealistic affirmations fail because the nervous system rejects them as false. Visualization belongs here, but not as fantasy. Visualization is neurological rehearsal. Motor learning research shows that imagined practice activates many of the same neural circuits as physical practice. When done correctly, visualization prepares the brain for execution. When done incorrectly, it becomes escapism. Effective visualization is specific, brief, and tied to action. You visualize process, not outcome. The first 5 minutes of the task, the obstacles, the response. A common misconception is that thought management is about controlling every thought. That is impossible and unnecessary. The goal is not total control. The goal is selective authority. You decide which thoughts get energy and which get dismissed. Over time, the dismissed thoughts weaken through non-use. Neural pathways that are not reinforced lose efficiency. This is synaptic pruning in action. Another mistake is timing. People try to manage thoughts when they are already overwhelmed. Skill acquisition requires low-stakes practice first. Start with minor loops, inconveniences, small frustrations, train interruption and replacement there. As proficiency increases, apply it to higher stress situations. This mirrors exposure protocols used in cognitive behavioral therapy. Thought management also requires an environment that supports it. Mental discipline fails when cognitive load is excessive. Sleep deprivation, constant notifications, and poor nutrition all reduce prefrontal capacity. This is not weakness, it is biology. Managing thoughts without managing inputs is inefficient. Reduce noise to increase authority. As this system installs, a shift occurs. Thoughts lose their emotional gravity. They become data. You still experience doubt, fear, and hesitation, but they no longer dictate behavior automatically. This is empowerment through skill, not belief. Your mind stops being an adversary and becomes a tool. The final insight is this: thoughts and emotions are related but distinct. A thought can trigger an emotion, but an emotion does not prove the thought true. Separating the two is the gateway to emotional mastery. Once you can manage thinking deliberately, you create space to feel without being controlled. That is where the next level of mastery begins. Chapter 5. Emotional detachment without coldness. Most people misunderstand emotional control. They imagine it as becoming numb, distant, or robotic. They confuse strength with suppression and calm with indifference. As a result, they swing between two extremes: emotional reactivity, where feelings dictate behavior, and emotional shutdown, where feelings are buried and ignored. Neither leads to mastery. One creates chaos. The other creates brittleness. True emotional strength lives in a third position: detachment without coldness. Detachment does not mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being dragged. To understand this, you need to separate 3 layers that are often blended together: emotion, reaction, and identity. An emotion is a physiological and neurological response. A reaction is the behavior that follows. Identity is the story you tell yourself about what that emotion means about you. Most people collapse all 3 into one moment. They feel anger, react with words or actions, and conclude, "I am an angry person." This collapse is where control is lost. Emotional mastery begins with decoupling. Neuroscience shows that emotions arise in the limbic system before conscious thought catches up. By the time you notice an emotion, your body has already shifted. Heart rate changes, muscles tense, hormones release. This is not a failure of discipline. It is how the nervous system evolved to protect you. The mistake is assuming that the first impulse deserves the final decision. Reactivity is speed without direction. It is the reflex to discharge emotion immediately through speech, action, or avoidance. Social media amplifies this by rewarding instant expression. Outrage, oversharing, and emotional broadcasting receive attention, which trains the brain to equate expression with relief. But relief is not resolution. Emotional discharge without understanding creates repetition. Suppression, on the other hand, is force without processing. The emotion is pushed down, not examined. It remains active beneath the surface, influencing tone, posture, and decision-making indirectly. Suppressed emotions leak. They emerge as passive aggression, fatigue, cynicism, or sudden overreactions that seem disproportionate. What you avoid integrating, you eventually enact. The alternative is observation. Observation means allowing the emotion to exist without immediately acting on it. This activates a different neural pathway, one that increases coherence between emotional and cognitive centers. You are not denying the emotion. You are giving it space without giving it the steering wheel. A practical framework here is the 90-second window rule. Research by neuroscientist Jill Bolte Taylor shows that the physiological surge of an emotion lasts approximately 60 to 90 seconds if it is not continuously re-triggered by thought. If you can refrain from feeding the emotion with interpretation and narrative during that window, its intensity naturally declines. The feeling passes. Clarity returns. This requires a pause, and pauses feel uncomfortable to people addicted to reaction. Silence feels like weakness to those who equate expression with power. In reality, the pause is where power is reclaimed. It is the space where choice re-enters. Detachment also requires precision in language. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," you say, "I am experiencing anxiety." This is not semantics. This is identity protection. Language shapes perception. When you merge identity with emotion, the emotion feels permanent and defining. When you describe it as an experience, it becomes temporary and movable. Caring deeply without surrendering control means you allow emotions to inform you, not command you. Emotions carry data. Anxiety may signal uncertainty. Anger may signal a violated boundary. Sadness may signal loss or meaning. Detachment allows you to extract the data without being consumed by the delivery system. Consider a professional setback. Reactivity leads to defensiveness or blame. Suppression leads to pretending it does not matter. Detachment leads to analysis. What exactly triggered this feeling? What expectation was violated? What variable can be adjusted next time? The emotion becomes a diagnostic tool rather than a threat. This approach also applies to relationships. Emotional absorption, taking on other people's moods as your own, is often mistaken for empathy. True empathy does not require emotional fusion. It requires understanding. When you absorb others' emotions, you lose objectivity and stability. When you observe them with compassion, you can respond effectively without drowning. A useful technique here is the emotional boundary scan. When a strong emotion arises in an interaction, ask silently, "Is this mine, theirs, or shared?" If it is theirs, your role is presence, not absorption. If it is yours, your role is responsibility, not projection. This scan prevents unnecessary escalation and emotional exhaustion. Calm under pressure is not the absence of emotion. It is emotional stability, the capacity to remain functional while feeling. Elite performers are not less emotional than others. They are better at regulating expression and timing. They feel the pressure fully, but they do not leak it into performance. This is why emotional detachment improves focus. Unregulated emotions fragment attention. Part of your cognitive bandwidth is consumed by managing internal turbulence. Once emotions are observed rather than fought or indulged, that bandwidth is freed. Focus becomes sustainable, not forced. A common obstacle is the fear that detachment will make you less human or less passionate. The opposite is true. When emotions are not constantly discharged or suppressed, they regain depth. You respond with intention rather than impulse. Passion becomes directed. Care becomes stable. You stop oscillating between intensity and exhaustion. Practice this skill in low-risk situations first. Traffic delays, minor disagreements, small disappointments. Notice the sensation, name it, pause, choose response. Repetition builds capacity. Over time, your nervous system learns that not every emotion requires immediate action. This recalibration is profound. The final reframe is this: calm is not passivity. Calm is readiness. It is strength that does not need to announce itself. When you are emotionally stable, you conserve energy. When you conserve energy, you can sustain focus. And sustained focus is the gateway to the next level of mastery. Chapter 6. Focus like a laser. You are not unfocused by accident. You are unfocused by design. Every platform, every notification, every infinite scroll is engineered to fracture your attention into pieces small enough to monetize. This is not convenience. This is extraction. And the cost is not time. The cost is potential. A distracted mind cannot build anything meaningful because it never stays in one place long enough to compound. Most people confuse movement with progress. They stay busy, responsive, occupied. They answer messages instantly. They multitask proudly. They touch many things but finish very little. Scattered effort feels productive because it creates motion. Deep effort feels uncomfortable because it demands stillness. One creates noise, the other creates results. Focus is not about working longer. It is about working deeper. The difference between average performers and elite performers is not intelligence or talent. It is attentional control. The ability to place the mind on one task and keep it there despite boredom, resistance, or discomfort. This ability is rare because it is not rewarded immediately. Distraction offers instant relief. Focus offers delayed power. The modern attention crisis begins internally. When the mind is trained to seek stimulation, silence feels intolerable. When novelty becomes the default, depth feels heavy. You sit down to work, and within minutes, the urge to check, switch, or escape appears. This is not laziness. It is withdrawal. Your brain has been conditioned to expect constant input. The first step to laser focus is accepting this discomfort as a signal, not a problem. Resistance appears precisely at the point where growth is possible. If you flee the sensation, you remain shallow. If you stay, capacity expands. Focus requires protocols, not motivation, not willpower. Protocols remove decision-making and conserve energy. One effective protocol is time-boxed intensity. Instead of vague hours, you work in defined blocks of high concentration, 30 to 90 minutes. One objective, no negotiation. Before each block, define a single outcome. Not a task list, an outcome. For example, draft the introduction, not work on writing. Specificity directs attention. Ambiguity invites distraction. The brain needs a target. During the block, eliminate inputs aggressively. No notifications. No background media. No switching. If the urge to escape appears, do nothing. Sit with it. The urge will peak and pass. This trains attentional endurance. Each time you resist switching, you strengthen the neural circuitry responsible for sustained focus. Another protocol is environment control. Focus is contextual. The brain associates locations with behaviors. If you work where you consume, attention degrades. Create a dedicated focus environment, even if it is minimal. A specific desk, a specific chair, a specific time. Repetition turns the environment into a cue. Eventually, focus becomes automatic upon entry. Intensity matters more than duration. 10 minutes of true focus produces more than an hour of fragmented attention. This is why many people feel exhausted despite little progress. They expend energy constantly reorienting. Task switching has a cognitive cost. Each switch drains glucose and attention. Deep work conserves energy by reducing switches. Focus also requires constraint. Unlimited time invites procrastination. When you know you have a limited window, urgency sharpens attention. Parkinson's law applies here. Work expands to fill the time allotted. Short, intense blocks force prioritization. A critical mindset shift is this. Focus is not deprivation. It is selection. You are not saying no to pleasure. You are saying yes to something more valuable. Every moment of focus is an act of respect for your future self. You are choosing delayed reward over immediate distraction. Visualization can support this. Before a focus block, briefly imagine the future version of yourself benefiting from today's effort. Not abstract success, specific relief, reduced stress, increased options. This links present discomfort to future payoff, increasing persistence. Many people sabotage focus by waiting to feel ready. Readiness is irrelevant. Focus is a behavior, not a mood. You begin unfocused and become focused through action. The first minutes are always messy. Accept that. Do not interpret it as failure. Recovery is also part of focus mastery. Focus without rest leads to burnout. Schedule deliberate disengagement after intense work. Walk, breathe, be unstimulated. This allows attentional resources to replenish. Constant low-level stimulation prevents recovery. The deeper truth is this: what you focus on shapes who you become. Attention is identity in action. Repeated focus on trivialities creates a trivial life. Repeated focus on meaningful work builds weight, depth, and credibility. When focus becomes a discipline, execution becomes inevitable. You stop relying on bursts of motivation. You produce consistently, and consistency is what transforms effort into mastery. Focus fuels execution, because execution requires presence. The next stage is learning how to convert focused energy into decisive action without hesitation or delay. Chapter 7. The System That Runs Itself. Willpower feels powerful, but it is one of the weakest tools you can rely on. It fluctuates with sleep, stress, blood sugar, mood, and environment. Yet most people build their lives as if motivation will always be available on demand. This is why progress collapses the moment conditions are not ideal. The uncomfortable truth is this: if your success depends on how you feel today, it will fail tomorrow. High performers do not have more willpower, they use it less. Willpower is a finite cognitive resource. Research by psychologist Roy Baumeister demonstrated that self-control draws from a limited mental reservoir. Each decision, temptation resisted, or emotion regulated, depletes that reserve. By the end of the day, decision fatigue sets in, and discipline weakens. This is why people make their worst choices at night, not because they are weak, but because their mental energy is gone. The solution is not to become stronger. The solution is to become strategic. Systems replace motivation with structure. A system is a set of rules, environments, and defaults that guide behavior automatically. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like doing this?" the system answers for you. When designed correctly, the system makes the desired behavior the path of least resistance. Most people live inside anti-systems. Their environments encourage distraction, comfort, and consumption. They try to fight these forces with effort, which fails repeatedly. The disciplined individual reverses the equation. They design environments that enforce the right behavior even when motivation is absent. Think of behavior as a river. Willpower tries to paddle upstream. Systems change the direction of the current. The first layer of automation is decision reduction. Every repeated decision is a drain. What to work on, when to exercise, what to eat, when to rest. High performers eliminate these choices through pre-commitment. They decide once, in advance, and follow the rule later without negotiation. For example, instead of deciding daily whether to train, the rule becomes, training happens at the same time, on the same days, regardless of mood. The decision is already made. This frees cognitive resources for execution, not debate. The second layer is environment design. Behavior is heavily influenced by what is visible, accessible, and convenient. If distractions are close, you will use them. If productive tools are ready, you will engage them. This is not a character flaw. It is human psychology. Remove friction from good behaviors, add friction to bad ones. If focus is the goal, the phone does not stay on the desk. It stays in another room. If reading is the goal, the book is placed where the phone used to be. If unhealthy food is the temptation, it does not enter the house. You do not need restraint when the trigger is gone. This principle is called stimulus control. You are not controlling yourself. You are controlling the stimuli that control you. The third layer is habit stacking. Habits form more reliably when attached to existing routines. Instead of creating isolated behaviors, you anchor new actions to stable ones. After brushing your teeth, you journal. After your first coffee, you plan your day. After shutting down work, you reflect. The existing habit becomes the trigger for the new one. Consistency matters more than intensity in habit formation. A behavior repeated daily at low intensity wires the brain more effectively than sporadic bursts of effort. Neural pathways strengthen through frequency, not force. This is why small, non-negotiable actions outperform ambitious but inconsistent plans. Tracking reinforces systems. What gets measured gets maintained. Simple tracking creates feedback loops that guide behavior without emotion. You do not judge the data. You observe it. Missed days are not failures. They are signals. The goal is not perfection. The goal is system integrity. A common mistake is over-engineering. Complex systems collapse under their own weight. The best systems are simple, boring, and reliable. If a rule requires constant attention, it will fail. Automation should reduce thinking, not increase it. Another mistake is relying on identity slogans instead of structure. Saying "I am disciplined" does nothing without an environment that supports disciplined action. Identity follows behavior, not the other way around. Act first. Identity consolidates later. Systems also require periodic review. Life changes. Demands shift. A system that worked last year may fail now. Schedule monthly audits. Ask 3 questions. What is working automatically? What requires too much effort? What friction can be adjusted? This keeps the system aligned with reality. The deeper advantage of systems is psychological stability. When your actions are governed by structure, emotions lose control. You stop negotiating with yourself. You show up even when conditions are imperfect. Over time, this builds trust with yourself. Self-trust is the foundation of confidence. A life that runs on systems does not feel rigid. It feels free. Freedom is not the absence of structure. It is the absence of chaos. When the basics run automatically, mental space opens for creativity, strategy, and growth. Intensity feels impressive. Consistency is transformative. Anyone can push hard for a short time. Few can show up quietly, repeatedly, without drama. Systems make this possible. The transition now is critical. Once consistency is secured through systems, the question becomes how to maintain progress over years, not weeks. That requires patience, long-term thinking, and the ability to delay gratification. That is where true mastery compounds. Chapter 8. The Art of Consistent Action. Consistency is not a personality trait. It is an operational skill. Most people believe consistency means repeating the same behavior every day with the same energy. That belief is why they fail. Energy fluctuates. Life interferes. What stays consistent is not effort, but the decision to act regardless of internal conditions. The counterintuitive truth is this: consistency has very little to do with motivation and almost everything to do with identity and momentum management. Motivation-driven action depends on emotional readiness. Identity-driven action depends on rules. When behavior is tied to motivation, action becomes optional. When behavior is tied to identity, action becomes inevitable. The question shifts from, "Do I feel like this?" to, "What does someone like me do next?" That shift removes emotion from execution. Consistency operates on a principle known as behavioral inevitability. A behavior is inevitable when it occurs even on low-energy, distracted, or emotionally resistant days. High performers are not consistent because they feel inspired. They are consistent because their baseline behavior is non-negotiable. The floor matters more than the ceiling. A common misconception is that consistency requires high standards every day. In reality, consistency requires minimum standards that are always met. This is known as the minimum viable action. The goal is not to perform optimally. The goal is to maintain continuity. Continuity preserves momentum, and momentum reduces resistance. Momentum is a psychological phenomenon where completed actions reduce the activation energy required for subsequent actions. The brain prefers completion over initiation. Starting is costly. Continuing is cheap. This is why missing days is dangerous. It resets the cost of starting back to zero. Consistency protects momentum by preventing restarts. One effective method is chain building. You define a simple daily action and track consecutive completions visually. Each completed day reinforces the identity of someone who shows up. The chain itself becomes motivating, not the task. Breaking the chain feels costly, which leverages loss aversion, a cognitive bias identified by Daniel Kahneman. People work harder to avoid losses than to acquire gains. The action chosen for chain building must be deliberately small. If the action is too demanding, resistance will appear. The purpose of the chain is not progress in isolation, it is reliability. For example, writing one paragraph daily builds the identity of a writer more effectively than writing 10 pages sporadically. Scale comes later. Another mechanism is implementation intentions. Instead of vague plans, you define behavior in an if-then format. If it is 7 a.m., Then I start my first work block. If I feel resistance, then I begin with 5 minutes. This removes ambiguity. Ambiguity is where consistency dies. Clear triggers produce automatic responses. Emotional resistance is inevitable. The mistake is treating resistance as a signal to stop. Resistance is not a warning, it is a threshold. Neurobiologically, resistance often precedes engagement. Dopamine increases after initiation, not before. Waiting to feel ready delays the reward mechanism that would make the task easier. To act despite resistance, you separate initiation from performance. The rule is simple. Start poorly. Give yourself permission to execute at low quality initially. Quality improves once momentum is established. This counters perfectionism, which often disguises avoidance as high standards. Setbacks must be reframed correctly. Most people interpret setbacks as evidence of failure. This interpretation damages identity and increases dropout rates. A more accurate model treats setbacks as stress inoculation. Each disruption trains recovery skills. The critical metric is not how often you fall off, but how quickly you resume. Recovery speed is a measurable skill. You track the number of hours or days between a missed action and resumption. The goal is to shorten that gap over time. High consistency is not 0 misses. It is fast recovery. This perspective prevents the all-or-nothing collapse that ends most habits. Consistency also requires realistic load management. Many people fail not from laziness, but from overcommitment. They stack too many behaviors too quickly. Cognitive bandwidth is limited. Introduce behaviors sequentially, not simultaneously. Stabilize one before adding another. Weekly review reinforces consistency. Once per week, assess 3 variables: adherence rate, friction points, and energy alignment. Adherence rate shows reliability. Friction points reveal where systems need adjustment. Energy alignment identifies when tasks are scheduled against natural rhythms. Adjustments maintain sustainability. Identity reinforcement must be behavior-based, not affirmational. Instead of saying, "I am consistent," you reference evidence. "I acted on my plan 5 days this week." Evidence-based identity is resilient. It survives emotional volatility because it is grounded in data. The long-term payoff of consistent action is trust. When you repeatedly follow through, you build credibility with yourself. Self-trust reduces internal negotiation. Reduced negotiation lowers cognitive load. Lower cognitive load frees attention for strategic thinking. Consistency compounds upward. The transition now is essential. Consistent action without recovery leads to burnout. Sustainability requires understanding rest, recovery cycles, and energy renewal. Mastery is not relentless strain. It is controlled output over time. That is the next layer to build. Chapter 9: Strategic Rest and Recovery. The belief that rest is earned only after exhaustion is one of the most damaging ideas in modern performance culture. It sounds disciplined, but it produces fragility. When you treat rest as a reward instead of a requirement, you train yourself to operate in a constant state of depletion. The counterintuitive truth is that high performers do not rest because they are tired. They rest so they never become tired enough to lose precision. Hustle culture frames fatigue as proof of commitment. In reality, chronic fatigue is evidence of poor system design. The nervous system does not interpret non-stop effort as ambition. It interprets it as threat. When threat signals remain elevated, cognitive flexibility drops, emotional reactivity increases, and decision quality degrades. You may still be busy, but your output becomes blunt instead of sharp. Rest is not the absence of work. It is the deliberate restoration of specific systems. Physical recovery restores muscles and energy substrates. Cognitive recovery restores attention and working memory. Emotional recovery restores regulation capacity. Strategic rest identifies which system is taxed and targets recovery accordingly. Passive collapse does not qualify. A key misconception is that recovery is passive. Precision recovery is active and intentional. It operates on cycles. Human performance follows ultradian rhythms of roughly 90 to 120 minutes of peak capacity followed by a natural dip. Ignoring these cycles forces the brain into compensatory effort, which feels like willpower but is actually stress chemistry. Sleep is the foundation layer. Without adequate sleep, no recovery strategy compensates. During deep sleep, the glymphatic system clears metabolic waste from the brain, including beta-amyloid proteins linked to cognitive decline. 7 to 9 hours is not a lifestyle preference. It is a biological requirement. Consistency of sleep timing matters as much as duration. Beyond sleep, daily recovery windows are essential. After focused work, the brain needs periods of low stimulation to reset. This activates the default mode network, which consolidates learning and integrates information. Walking, light stretching, or quiet reflection are effective. Scrolling is not. Digital input maintains cognitive load even when it feels relaxing. Another recovery lever is parasympathetic activation. Stress places the body in sympathetic dominance. Recovery requires shifting into parasympathetic mode. Slow breathing protocols accomplish this efficiently. A simple method is a 6-second exhale paired with a 3-second inhale for 5 minutes. This lowers heart rate variability and signals safety to the nervous system. Physical training illustrates recovery clearly. Muscles grow during rest, not during lifting. Cognitive capacity follows the same rule. Focus improves when attention systems are allowed to reset. If you never disengage, your baseline deteriorates. Professionals protect their baseline. Pretenders spend it all. Weekly recovery planning prevents cumulative fatigue. At least one low-load day per week reduces allostatic load, the wear and tear from chronic stress. This does not mean inactivity. It means reducing intensity. Technical work, learning, or creative exploration maintain engagement without strain. Recovery must also address emotional depletion. Emotional labor, conflict, and suppression consume regulatory resources. Without emotional recovery, focus collapses even if physical energy remains. Naming emotions, journaling briefly, or having controlled conversations releases internal pressure. Suppression delays cost. Expression manages it. A practical framework is the recovery audit. Once per week, assess 3 domains: physical energy, mental clarity, and emotional stability on a 10-point scale. Any domain below 7 requires targeted recovery. This prevents guessing and builds awareness of your internal state. Another tool is recovery sequencing. You recover in the reverse order of depletion. If the day was cognitively intense, mental recovery comes first. If it was emotionally charged, emotional recovery precedes physical training. Random recovery is inefficient. Sequenced recovery is precise. Common failure occurs when rest triggers guilt. Guilt keeps the nervous system activated, negating recovery benefits. You must redefine rest as maintenance. A machine that never stops breaks. A professional maintains equipment before failure. The same logic applies here. Longevity is the separating variable. Anyone can push hard briefly. Few can sustain output for years. Strategic rest extends your operational lifespan. It preserves judgment, creativity, and resilience. It allows you to show up tomorrow with clarity instead of friction. The transition forward is clear. Rest restores energy, but presence determines how that energy is used. Once the system is replenished, awareness becomes the next constraint. Energy without presence leaks. The next phase is learning to occupy the moment fully, without distraction or drift. Chapter 10: Silent Confidence. Confidence is commonly mistaken for volume. The louder the voice, the stronger the belief. At least that is the illusion the world sells. In reality, excessive expression is often compensation. True confidence does not announce itself. It stabilizes a room without effort. The first uncomfortable truth is this: when you feel the need to prove yourself, you are already negotiating from weakness. Arrogance and confidence are opposites, not neighbors. Arrogance is externally powered. It feeds on reaction, validation, and visibility. Confidence is internally regulated. It exists whether anyone is watching or not. Psychologically, arrogance correlates with fragile self-concept. Confidence correlates with self-congruence. One performs. The other simply is. Grounded confidence begins with presence. Presence is the ability to occupy the current moment without mentally rehearsing, defending, or impressing. Neuroscientifically, this requires reduced default mode network noise, the mental chatter about self-image and future outcomes. When that noise quiets, attention stabilizes. Others feel this stability instinctively. Humans are wired to detect nervous system states, not words. Body language is the first transmitter of silent confidence. Stillness signals control. Excess movement signals internal agitation. Studies in behavioral psychology show that individuals who move less, blink less, and gesture deliberately are perceived as more authoritative, even when they speak less. The goal is not stiffness, but economy. Every movement should have a reason. Posture matters, but not in the exaggerated sense. Neutral alignment, head stacked over shoulders, shoulders over hips, allows diaphragmatic breathing. This breathing pattern maintains parasympathetic balance, preventing stress responses during interaction. Slouched posture compresses the chest, shortens breath, and subtly increases anxiety. Confidence starts with oxygen. Eye contact is another lever. Confident individuals do not stare to dominate, nor do they avoid to submit. They maintain steady contact while listening, then release it naturally while speaking. This signals security. A useful ratio is 3 to 5 seconds per contact, broken gently. Overholding creates tension. Underholding creates doubt. Speech patterns reveal internal state faster than content. Rapid speech, filler words, and upward inflection indicate uncertainty. Calm authority uses controlled pacing and downward inflection. Silence between sentences is not dead space. It is integration time. When you pause, you force others to process rather than react. This shifts power subtly in your direction. The pause is one of the most underused tools of confidence. Most people rush to fill silence because silence exposes insecurity. When you pause before responding, you demonstrate self-trust. You show that your worth is not tied to immediate reaction. In negotiations and conversations, the person most comfortable with silence often controls the frame. Restraint is the behavioral expression of confidence. You do not correct every misunderstanding. You do not chase every opportunity to speak. You choose relevance over visibility. This selectivity signals abundance. Scarcity talks constantly. Abundance waits. Another distinction is between opinionated and grounded. Loud confidence relies on opinions to feel solid. Silent confidence relies on principles. Opinions fluctuate with context. Principles remain stable. When you operate from principles, you are less reactive to disagreement. You do not need to win every exchange to maintain identity. Social leverage increases when you reduce unnecessary disclosure. Oversharing is often framed as authenticity, but psychologically it weakens position. Information asymmetry creates curiosity and respect. This does not mean deception, it means discernment. You reveal selectively, based on trust and timing. Calm authority also depends on emotional regulation. When emotions spike, confidence collapses into defensiveness. The work you did in emotional mastery now pays dividends. You can feel intensity without broadcasting it. This containment is interpreted as strength, even when the internal experience is demanding. A practical framework is the presence triad: posture, breath, and pace. Before any interaction, align posture, slow breath to 6-second exhales, and consciously reduce speaking speed by 10%. This triad stabilizes your nervous system within 30 seconds. The effect is immediate and noticeable. Common mistakes undermine silent confidence. One is forced minimalism, speaking less without internal stability. This reads as aloofness, not confidence. Another is performative stillness, copying external cues without emotional regulation. Confidence cannot be faked for long because the body leaks truth. Daily training builds this capacity. Short periods of intentional silence strengthen tolerance. 5 minutes of sitting without input, observing breath and posture, increases comfort with stillness. Over time, this carries into social environments. Confidence also grows through competence. Silence becomes powerful when backed by ability. Preparation reduces the need for display. When you know your material, you do not rush. You do not over-explain. You trust that what needs to be said will land. Silent confidence changes how others respond to you. People listen more closely. Interruptions decrease. You are not competing for space, you are occupying it. This is not dominance over others. It is dominance over self-expression impulses. As confidence stabilizes, influence becomes the next frontier. When you no longer need to push, people lean in. When you stop performing, others project authority onto you. Influence without force emerges naturally from grounded presence. Silence, used correctly, becomes social leverage, not absence, precision, and from that precision, influence flows without manipulation. Chapter 11. Influence without manipulation. Most people try to influence by force. They persuade harder, talk faster, push their agenda louder, and the harder they push, the more resistance they create. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The moment you need to control someone, you have already lost influence. Real influence does not pull strings. It reshapes the environment in which decisions are made. Manipulation and influence are not the same skill at different intensities. They are built on opposite foundations. Manipulation is transactional and short-term. It relies on pressure, incentives, or fear. Influence is relational and durable. It emerges from understanding how people think, feel, and decide. One extracts compliance, the other earns alignment. Psychologically, manipulation activates defense systems. When people sense they are being steered, the amygdala flags threat, even if the message is reasonable. Influence works differently. It lowers threat perception by increasing psychological safety. When people feel safe, their prefrontal cortex stays online, allowing openness and cooperation. Influence begins where threat ends. The core mechanism of influence is not persuasion, it is comprehension. When you understand someone's internal model of the world, their values, fears, incentives, and identity, you no longer need to push. You can frame ideas in a way that naturally fits their existing structure. This is not deception. It is alignment. Listening is the most underrated dominance behavior in social dynamics, not passive listening, but active, structured listening. When you listen deeply, you control the tempo of the interaction. You gather information while the other person reveals leverage points unconsciously. The one who speaks less often learns more. There are 3 levels of listening. Level 1 is surface listening, waiting for your turn to talk. Level 2 is content listening, understanding the words. Level 3 is intent listening, detecting the underlying need or fear driving those words. Influence lives at level 3. Most people never reach it. A practical tool is the reflective loop. When someone speaks, reflect back not just what they said, but what it implies. So what you're concerned about is losing reliability, not just speed. This signals understanding. Neuroimaging studies show that being accurately understood reduces activity in stress-related brain regions. Trust forms faster when people feel mentally mirrored. Another leverage point is validation without agreement. Validation means acknowledging emotional reality, not endorsing conclusions. I see why that would feel risky given your past experience. This lowers defensiveness. Agreement can come later or not at all. Validation opens the door. Argument slams it shut. People remember how you make them feel more than what you convince them to do. When someone feels seen, they attach positive affect to your presence. Over time, this becomes trust. Trust is influence stored over time. Once built, it compounds. You are given the benefit of the doubt before you speak. Influence also depends on asking better questions than others. Questions direct attention. Attention shapes perception. Instead of telling someone what to think, guide what they examine. What would success look like if this worked? Shifts focus from resistance to possibility. The question does the work, not you. A common mistake is mistaking charisma for influence. Charisma attracts attention. Influence changes behavior. Charisma without trust fades quickly. Influence without charisma persists quietly. You do not need to be magnetic. You need to be consistent and accurate in how you engage. Another distinction is persuasion versus positioning. Persuasion argues for an idea. Positioning arranges conditions, so the idea becomes obvious. When you help someone arrive at a conclusion themselves, ownership increases. People defend ideas they believe they chose. Influence increases when you reduce ego visibility. The less the interaction feels about you, the more receptive others become. This requires ego regulation. If your need to be right overrides your desire to be effective, influence collapses. Effectiveness often requires letting go of credit. A useful framework is the SERVE model of influence. S. Seek to understand before being understood. E. Empathize without absorbing emotions. R. Reflect meaning, not just words. V. Validate emotional reality. E. Enable autonomy by offering choices, not commands. This model shifts influence from extraction to empowerment. People do not feel used, they feel supported. Boundaries matter here. Influence without manipulation does not mean passivity. You do not abandon your values to maintain harmony. You state boundaries calmly and early. Clarity prevents resentment. Influence thrives in clear structures, not blurred ones. Influence also requires patience. Immediate compliance is not the goal. Sustainable alignment is. Sometimes the most influential move is allowing space for reflection. Silence again becomes leverage. When you stop pushing, others start processing. You will notice a change as you apply this. Conversations slow down. People open up more. Resistance softens. You are no longer managing reactions. You are shaping understanding. This is influence that lasts beyond the room. At its highest level, influence becomes service. You help others think better, decide better, and act in ways aligned with their long-term interests. This builds loyalty without dependency. People grow around you instead of shrinking. And when influence is grounded in service, leadership becomes inevitable. Not because you claim authority, but because others invite it. That is the transition ahead, moving from influencing individuals to shaping groups through trust and example. Chapter 12. Leading from Behind. Most people imagine leadership as standing at the front, issuing direction, collecting recognition. That image is attractive because it feeds identity. It is also inefficient. The uncomfortable truth is that visible leadership often produces dependent followers, not capable ones. The highest form of leadership does not amplify the leader. It multiplies the group. Traditional leadership myths are built on ego and exposure. Be the loudest voice. Be the final authority. Be the face everyone associates with success. This model creates short-term compliance but long-term fragility. When everything runs through one person, progress bottlenecks. When that person leaves, the system collapses. That is not leadership. That is centralization of power. Leading from behind operates on a different principle: durability. Instead of positioning yourself as the engine, you become the architect. You design conditions, standards, and incentives so the system produces results without constant intervention. Your presence is felt even when you are not visible. This is quiet consistency, not spotlight performance. The psychological shift begins with responsibility. Weak leaders delegate tasks and keep ownership. Strong leaders do the opposite. They take responsibility for outcomes and distribute ownership of execution. When something fails, the leader absorbs blame. When something succeeds, credit is shared outward. This is not humility theater. It is strategy. People protect what they feel ownership over. Credit sharing is not about generosity. It is about reinforcement. Publicly recognizing contribution strengthens identity alignment. When someone hears, "This worked because of your thinking," their self-concept updates. They become more invested, more careful, more capable. Over time, competence compounds across the group instead of accumulating at the top. Another pillar is consistency. Charismatic leadership relies on energy spikes. Behind-the-scenes leadership relies on predictability. Same standards, same expectations, same follow-through. This creates psychological safety. People perform better when rules do not shift with mood. Consistency reduces cognitive load and frees attention for execution. Visibility is replaced by availability. You do not need to be seen constantly, but you must be accessible when it matters. This balance prevents micromanagement while preserving support. The goal is to intervene at decision points, not at every step. Guidance replaces control. Leading from behind also requires restraint of ego expression. You resist the urge to correct publicly when private correction is sufficient. You resist the urge to demonstrate superiority when asking a question would develop others. Every time you choose display over development, you weaken the system. A useful framework is the leadership leverage ratio. Ask yourself, for every hour of my effort, how many hours of effective action does this create in others? Low-leverage leadership produces one-to-one output. High-leverage leadership produces exponential output. Training, clarity, and trust increase this ratio more than directives ever will. Legacy thinking is the final shift. Ego leadership asks, how do I look now? Legacy leadership asks, what still works when I'm gone? This perspective changes decisions. You invest in documentation instead of heroics. You build processes instead of relying on memory. You teach principles instead of giving answers. Another distinction is authority versus influence. Authority enforces compliance. Influence inspires commitment. When you lead from behind, authority becomes less visible because influence does more work. People act correctly even when unsupervised. That is the metric of success. Common mistakes appear here. One is disappearing completely. Leading from behind is not abdication. It is strategic presence. Another is overcrediting to the point of dishonesty. Credibility requires accuracy. Praise must be specific and earned, not automatic. You will know this approach is working when the group begins solving problems without you, when standards are upheld in your absence, when others defend the culture voluntarily. At that point, leadership has scaled beyond personality. This style also protects you from burnout. When systems carry weight, you are no longer the bottleneck. You can think long-term instead of firefighting. Your role shifts from reacting to shaping. Leading from behind is not passive, it is disciplined. It requires patience, emotional control, and trust in process. It sacrifices short-term recognition for long-term impact. Few choose it because ego resists invisibility, but those who do create something that outlives them. Leadership at its highest level is not about being followed. It is about creating more leaders. When strength multiplies beyond self, the work becomes larger than identity. And once you understand this, the final question emerges. How do you apply everything you have learned inward, deliberately, over time? That requires a plan, not inspiration, structure. The next step is designing your personal transformation with intention. Chapter 13. Your 90-Day Transformation Plan. Most people fail not because they lack desire, but because they mistake ambition for a plan. They collect ideas, feel motivated, then return to default behavior. The uncomfortable truth is that inspiration without structure decays fast. Transformation does not happen in moments of intensity. It happens through engineered progression. This is where philosophy becomes practice. A 90-day horizon is not arbitrary. Psychologically, it is long enough to rewire identity patterns and short enough to sustain urgency. Research in behavioral science shows that habits begin to stabilize around 60 days, but identity integration lags behind. 90 days bridges that gap. The goal is not temporary improvement. It is becoming a different operator. This plan is built on one principle. Identity drives behavior, and behavior reinforces identity. You are not trying to do more. You are trying to become someone who does not negotiate with their standards. Each phase targets a different layer of identity construction. Phase 1 is foundation, days 1 to 30. The objective here is stabilization, not optimization. Most people sabotage themselves by starting too aggressively. This phase reduces chaos before adding load. You establish non-negotiables that protect energy, attention, and self-trust. There are 3 priorities in Phase 1. First, sleep consistency. Same bedtime, same wake time, within a 30-minute window. This anchors your nervous system and improves executive function. Second, input control. Remove or sharply limit the top 3 sources of digital distraction, not moderation, elimination. Third, daily execution proof. One small, clearly defined task, completed every day without exception. This rebuilds credibility with yourself. Measurement matters. Track completion, not performance quality. Did you show up? Yes or no? This phase retrains reliability. Motivation is irrelevant here. You are proving that action happens regardless of mood. Phase 2 is momentum, days 31 to 60. Once stability exists, you increase output intelligently. This phase focuses on systems and skill acquisition. You add leverage instead of effort. The core shift is from task completion to process ownership. Identify one primary domain: career, health, or skill development. Apply structured work blocks 3 to 4 times per week. 90-minute focus sessions aligned with your peak energy window. During these blocks, single task only on the highest leverage activity in that domain. You also introduce weekly reviews. Every 7 days, assess 3 metrics: consistency rate, energy trend, and friction points. Consistency rate should exceed 80%. Energy should be stable or improving. Friction points identify where systems fail and need redesign. This is not self-criticism. It is system debugging. Phase 2 is where identity begins to shift from trying to training. You stop asking how you feel and start asking what the process requires. Momentum builds because decision fatigue drops. Your life starts pulling you forward instead of requiring constant push. Phase 3 is identity integration, days 61 to 90. This is where most people relapse if they skip structure. The focus here is embodiment. You align behavior across domains so identity becomes coherent. You introduce standards. Standards are rules you follow even when no one is watching. Examples include zero tolerance for skipped commitments, controlled emotional responses under stress, and deliberate rest protocols. Standards are binary. You either uphold them or you do not. This clarity eliminates negotiation. You also expand scope. Apply the same discipline to relationships, communication, and long-term planning. This prevents compartmentalization, where progress exists in one area and chaos in another. Integrated identity is stable identity. At the end of each phase, you conduct a formal review. Write answers to 3 questions. What behaviors are now automatic? Where do I still hesitate? What does my future self require next? These questions maintain forward motion without complacency. Common mistakes undermine this plan. One is adding too much too fast. Another is chasing novelty instead of depth. A third is treating setbacks as failure instead of feedback. Missed days are data points, not identity verdicts. Correct the system and continue. This plan does not promise ease. It promises clarity. You will feel resistance. That resistance is evidence of identity friction. Each time you act anyway, friction decreases. This is how self-mastery compounds quietly. By day 90, the external results may vary. The internal shift will not. You will trust yourself more. You will require less motivation. You will operate with fewer words and more precision. That is the real transformation. Self-mastery is not a finish line. It is a living process. This plan does not end the journey. It stabilizes the operator. And once you are stable, the final reckoning becomes unavoidable. What kind of person are you becoming when no one is watching? That question closes this work and opens the last chapter. The silent revolution. The world you are returning to after this ends will still be loud. It will still reward noise, performance, outrage, and constant visibility. Nothing out there has changed. What has changed is your position inside it. You now see the pattern clearly. Noise consumes energy. Silence concentrates it. Most people spend their lives broadcasting intention. A few spend their lives building capacity. That difference decides everything. From the beginning, the contrast has been simple but uncomfortable. A busy life versus a powerful one. Reaction versus direction. Visibility versus mastery. You were never lacking motivation. You were lacking containment. Without structure, energy leaks. Without silence, focus fragments. Without discipline, potential stays theoretical. Silence, as you now understand it, was never about withdrawal from the world. It was about withdrawal from unnecessary friction. Silence is where feedback becomes audible. It is where intention hardens into commitment. When you stop announcing, you start noticing. When you stop explaining, you start executing. Every chapter of this work has pointed to the same principle from different angles. Control the body so energy is reliable. Regulate emotions so reactions do not hijack decisions. Train the mind so thoughts become tools instead of traps. Design systems so action happens without negotiation. Rest strategically so precision replaces exhaustion. Show up with presence so confidence stabilizes without performance. Influence through understanding, not force. Lead by multiplying strength, not collecting credit. None of this is loud. None of it trends. None of it earns instant applause. That is precisely why it works. Daily discipline is not dramatic. It is repetitive, often boring, sometimes uncomfortable. But discipline compounds identity. Every small, private follow-through sends a signal inward. You are someone who keeps promises to yourself. That signal rewires how you decide, how you speak, how you carry yourself. Destiny is not discovered. It is trained. Privacy is power because it removes distortion. When no one is watching, you stop optimizing for appearance and start optimizing for function. You choose what works, not what looks impressive. This is where real confidence forms. This is where leverage accumulates. The silent revolution is not external. It will not be visible on social feeds or announced in speeches. It happens quietly, inside individuals who stop outsourcing control. Over time, these individuals become immovable, not because they dominate others, but because they dominate themselves. Now comes the challenge, not symbolic, practical. 30 days of silence, no announcing goals, no seeking validation, no broadcasting progress. 30 days of execution in private, train, work, study, rest, reflect, adjust. Let results speak later, or not at all. This is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about testing who you are when attention is removed. During these 30 days, notice what surfaces. Restlessness, doubt, the urge to be seen. These impulses reveal where power was leaking. Instead of judging them, observe and continue. Each resisted impulse strengthens internal authority. By the end of 30 days, something subtle but irreversible happens. Your relationship with yourself changes. You trust your word more. You move with less urgency and more intent. You speak less and mean more. Others feel it, even if they cannot name it. This is the invitation, not to be admired, not to be followed, not to be praised, to be unstoppable. Unstoppable because you no longer depend on motivation. Unstoppable because you have systems instead of wishes. Unstoppable because silence has turned your attention inward and sharpened it. Unstoppable because you operate from principle, not impulse. The world will keep shouting. Let it. You will be building, quietly, consistently, relentlessly. And when results arrive, as they always do for those who train instead of talk, you will not need to explain them. You will simply move forward, carrying the kind of power that does not ask for permission. The silent revolution has already started. It starts wherever you decide to keep going when no one is watching.